And so good day, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I know at least myself, and I know a lot of you are very excited to have this workshop done all around PR fundamentals and really 101. And so today we have our guest speaker, Jodi, who was actually connected to us through one of our alumni at the DMZ. So she works with quite a few alumni of the DMZ, and we got connected just to see if there was not only any kind of articles or stories that we could help collaborate with her, but as we were talking to her, we also felt like there would be a really great opportunity for her to share her insight and experience from the many, many years. I think, is it 20 plus? I think if I recall.
Yeah, it's a long time that I've been in PR, although this year, this summer, is our 20th anniversary since I started the business. Yeah.
So I was just a month or two ahead of time, but we'll round up and we'll say 20 years running your PR firm. And so we're going to very quickly kind of pass the floor over to Jodi to introduce herself and take her through her presentation. With that said, just a few quick housekeeping items. We are recording this session, so we will make it available for all of you afterwards, or if there's anyone on your team who isn't able to join us, we'll have it available on our portal. And we also just request that if you have any if you have any questions throughout the presentation, if you just wanted to put them in the chat, we will have a Q&A section at the end. So if there's anything you see in a slide or anything that you may want to kind of follow up on, please feel free to put it in the chat. It may be addressed later on in the presentation, or we may spend some time just in the Q&A section at the end going over it. And so without any further ado, all of you are sick of hearing from me. We want to kind of pass the floor over to our special guest. So Jodi, thank you so much for joining us today. We're really privileged to be able to have you share your insight and experience, and we will pass the floor over to you. Thank you once again for joining us today.
Thanks, Shane. Really great to be here. And it's been a long time actually since I've been actually in the DMZ. I guess probably the same applies for most of you as well. So glad to be doing this virtually. And of course, I've done a presentation that we'll go through and hopefully answer a lot of your questions, thoughts around using PR as a startup, when's the right time to actually get started with it, that kind of thing. So I've got a number of slides that we'll go through. I'm actually just going to share. Just before I do that, let me give you a little bit of background. I've been in PR my entire career, 100% focused on tech. I'm a real geek at heart, curls and all. I just love technology. I love being able to take sort of really complex terms and being able to explain it to media in a way that resonates with them. Sometimes they're not specialists themselves and don't necessarily understand, especially when it comes to enterprise technology. And so we love working with media. We actually do work North America wide. So the lens that I'm sort of bringing everything to you at today is looking at it not just from a Canadian perspective, but actually North America wide. And specific with a focus on technology. This is our work. We do a lot of work with startups. We work with growth companies. We also work with VC. So we really come at things from a variety of different perspectives around working with media, and hope to be able to support you guys in whatever way you need and answer any questions that you have. So with that, let me just share my screen and all right, so there you go. So you guys should be able to share it. I'm actually sharing it just because of the way, unfortunately, the way that Zoom works, it kind of messes things up. I can't actually even see everybody in who's participating when I actually do Zoom. So I've actually shared it this way through a PDF. So just so that you know, and I'm also happy to share this document afterwards so that everybody has access to it. All right, obviously the focus for today is really public relations for startups, helping you understand sort of everything that there is to know. And there's a lot more to know than obviously what we're going to go through, but I want to give you some foundational insights around using PR as a startup to help create awareness for your startup. The first thing I wanted to do is share a quote, and a lot of you have probably seen this before, but Bill Gates very famously said, if he was down to his last dollar, he would spend it on public relations. And the reason why is that PR actually converts. A lot of people think, PR is purely just an awareness tool. It's just there to help make sure that people know about you. But ultimately, it's been proven that PR actually generates conversion rates of anywhere from 10 to 50 times that of advertising. And the reason for that is because the majority of consumers trust earned media over traditional ads. So that's just sort of something for you to think about. Of course, we don't say that public relations is the be all and end all. It's about looking at communications as an overall integrated program. When it comes to public relations, I don't know whether any of you have ever seen this, but it's called the PEZO model. And it was actually created by a friend of mine by the name of Ginny Dietrich, and she's also a PR consultant. And she created this in 2014 as a way to really sort of highlight the evolution of PR. You know, a lot of people equate public relations to being media relations, but PR is actually so much more than that. So what this actually shows you is that there are 4 sort of key areas, and they all sort of converge to focus on the credibility, reputation, and thought leadership and authority that a startup or any company may have. But it's called the PEZO model, obviously P being paid media, then there's earned media, shared media, and owned. By the way, the Spin Sucks blog is a great place for you to get some insights around doing PR. It's a great resource for you. So I would definitely look at that. I'm going to go through sort of each of the sections for you. The one thing I don't necessarily agree about is sort of P being the first thing to focus on, because it's not necessarily the first area that you should be focusing on. So just keep that in mind as I go through here. There are certain elements like owned media, in fact, is the first thing before you even start engaging with media. You should be focusing on the owned side of things. But of course, you know, OSEP wouldn't sound as good as PEZO. So that's sort of the reason for this. All right, in terms of paid media, so obviously paid media in this context doesn't necessarily refer to you know, big fancy ads that you might see in a print magazine or on a billboard or anything like that. You can really think of this as an integrated approach to driving greater awareness. It's basically allocating dollars from your budget to increase your awareness and to amplify some of the things that you may be already doing. So it could be social media advertising, it could be doing a paid email campaign to drive leads or acquire fans through social media channels. It's really a number of different areas that you can be using paid. Obviously, when you're ready to use paid, you have to be very considerate, because we know that not every startup has a huge budget. So you want to make sure that you are being very mindful of that. When it comes to earned media, this is what most of you really know as media relations. And when it comes to earned media, of course, it's getting your name in print, having a journalist write about you, your company, your customers. It's what the PR industry is so well known for. However, the one thing to keep in mind is that it's not the only thing. There's also different types of earned media. People always think, oh, it's always about me getting an interview with a journalist and getting coverage. However, there are different types of opportunities there. For example, you might do an interview and you could get coverage. A customer of yours might also do an interview and get coverage. But at the same time, you might also pitch a contributed article, something that's focused on thought leadership or that allows you to really be an authority in your industry. So think about things a little bit differently, and especially in the very early stages of your startup, when you may not be ready to actually announce, and we'll get into sort of when you are ready, but when you aren't ready to move forward with sort of a full-blown media relations program, think of contributed articles as a great way to establish thought leadership, to get your name out there, and to start sort of setting the groundwork for an ongoing PR program. In terms of shared media, this is basically the opportunity for you to think about prospective customers. So not just about the brands, but think about the people behind them. So shared media is anything around social media. So when, for example, you set up a Twitter account, think about the target customers that you want to start engaging with. think about the startup, the target media that you want to engage with. Start following them, start seeing what they share. In fact, a lot of media will actually share their asks of the startup community through Twitter. They might say, I'm looking to speak to somebody about X, Y, and Z. Do you have someone that you can suggest? They might share an interesting article. You would take that article and actually reshare it, start engaging with them. So the idea is actually long before you start working with customers, start engaging with them on shared media. Then when it comes to the owned media side of things, and again, this is probably the first thing that you as a startup would be doing. So you would set up your website, you would probably set up a blog, and basically what you can start doing as a startup is start charting your journey, sharing your journey. So think about different angles. Why did you start the company? What are you doing that nobody else has done before? What milestones have you already achieved? Ultimately, the idea is to begin, before you even begin dealing with media, focus on getting a steady flow of content out on your own channels. And once you have that going, and then you're in a position to start dealing with media externally, at least you will have some good insights. So when you do reach out to a reporter and they go to your website and they want to understand who you are and what you're doing, they're going to have some great information in there. And then what you can do as well, once you have this content on your own channels, again, share it through those shared channels as well. So through social media, amplify it, make sure that people are aware of it. But again, a lot of this work on the own side of things will really help prepare you for media engagement down the road. Now, as a startup, you're probably wondering, when is the right time for me to start thinking about PR as a strategic part of my business? So one of the first things that you want to do is you want to take a step back and you want to look at the objectives that you want to achieve and the different ways that PR can help you. So for example, is maybe one of your objectives to create product awareness? Is there a new product that you're launching or new service that you're going to be offering? Do you want to perhaps create awareness because you're starting to go out and looking to raise funds? If so, what are the things that you would want an investor to know about your startup? Then, of course, there's the employer brand side of things. When you start and you're in a position to start hiring talent, you want them to feel comfortable and know what you guys are doing. So that could be another objective. And then, of course, there's competitive positioning. We know that it's, when a startup comes into the market, often they are doing something unique that nobody else is doing, or they may be doing something that is 1,000,000 times better than any other competitor in the market. So if that's your objective, just make sure that you've identified that, because once you know your objectives, then you're going to be very, very well set up to actually go out there and develop a PR strategy. So, and again, you're probably thinking, how do I even develop a PR strategy? It's just, there's so much to even think about here. But I think the idea here is knowing what your objective is. It's much easier to actually then determine how you're going to tackle the media side of things. All right. As a startup, a lot of startups come to us and say, how do I know I'm actually ready to start doing PR? And not every stage of a startup is ready for PR. Again, thinking of that whole Pezzo model, that the own side of things, absolutely, you're ready for that. You can do that anytime. The shared side of things, again, you can start doing that anytime. So when I say, am I ready for PR, I'm talking about some of those elements around media engagement. So there's a few different considerations. The first one is a sustained program. And what I mean by that is, are you in a position to actually engage in public relations on an ongoing basis? A lot of a lot of startups will come to us and say, I have a great announcement. I'd love to go out with this announcement, but it's one and done. And so we actually don't, as an agency, we actually don't take on project work like that, because PR is very much a pipeline strategy. And what I mean by that is that when you get started, you want to be consistent. You want to keep moving and engaging with media. You don't want to start and then 10 months down the road have your next announcement or your next engagement with media? And there's a few reasons for this. The first one is that when you go through and develop a media list, 10 months down the road, that list is going to change. You're going to have to start from the beginning again, go back and do that update. And so that happens often when you don't have an ongoing program. The other thing is that when you're building relationships with media, you want to do it and you want to have regular engagement with them. So what that means is reaching out to them when you have something interesting, or if you see a particular story that might be of particular interest to a reporter that you're looking at. If you don't have a sustained program, you're not going to be able to do that. Sorry for all the pings, by the way. I had actually shut down my messages, but apparently it's not stopping the messages from coming in. Just have a client going out with news, so they're messaging me a bunch of things that are happening right now. Then when it comes to news, you have to think about, news really by its definition is new information. So you have to think about what are some of the different ways that you can actually contribute to discussions in your industry. Think about the relevance. So for example, if you have a product that deals with something that's really timely, for example, maybe you're in the travel sector and you have something that's going to make the return to travel post-COVID so much easier for travelers. Obviously, think about that relevance and timeliness. Is there something interesting that you have that aligns with what media are looking for right now? So if you do, and you have, maybe it's a new product or service to announce, or you're planning to announce new funding, maybe new members of your executive team, or a new offering, or a particular service that's just going to change things dramatically based on current events, then now is a good time to do that. The other thing that you can think about is the novelty aspect of any kind of news that you have. So for example, is there something unique that you're doing? Is there something that you're saying that's completely different to anybody else out there? Should you be making a strong case in the market around things that you're doing? So that's another consideration there. And then of course it comes to customers. Customers are a very big part of public relations. And if you're not already thinking about how you can weave customers into everything that you're doing PR, now is the time to start doing that. So think about your customers not only as a way to generate revenue or to be there as a reference for other customers who might be considering your product or service. Think about them telling their story on what challenges they had and how your products or services made a big difference for them. So I always encourage startups to say, do we have customers? Because when you start going out there with news, so that new product announcement, if you don't have a customer who's ready to share about why that new product, even if it's a beta customer, if you don't have somebody who can share about the difference that your product has made, why they actually are working with you, why they chose you as a vendor to work with, media are going to be less interested because you have to humanize that story. So please definitely keep customers in mind. Then, of course, the other piece of this is thought leadership. And thought leadership is actually something that you can do in the absence of news. So before you even have those major announcements like your funding, your product launch, your exec team, whatever it is, thought leadership is a great opportunity to engage with media. If you're dealing with particular trends in the market, if there are particular ways that you're enabling customers to do things differently, if you have a completely different take on a product or service, using thought leadership is actually a great opportunity. Typically, it results in contributed article opportunities. So you might find a place where you can actually write about your thesis. What are the things that you're looking at? And so I would definitely, as a startup, I would take a look at a lot of different publications actually have third-party contributed articles, and you'll be able to tell because it'll say this article was written by so-and-so at XYZ company, as opposed to, this journalist at our publication. So those are typically contributed articles. So get a sense for what they're like. But these are sort of generally the four key things that I always say: evaluate these things. Are they in place? And if they are, then you're probably ready to start engaging with media sort of in a more meaningful manner. So this is going to be sort of really a big part of the focus for our conversation today. And really it's about building relationships with media. And there's a few sort of key things here that I've identified that are really important. The very first one is thinking about which media. And every company is going to have different media. So even for us as a PR agency, we work in the technology sector. You have no idea how many times we have a company who comes to us and says, oh, well, you've probably got all the relationships with all the key media that we're targeting. Well, that may not be the case, because we're dealing with clients who are in so many different vertical sectors, the airline industry, the restaurant industry, the cellular sector. And especially in the US, in Canada, not so much, but in the US, media tend to have different beats. In Canada, for example, and I'll give you an example of, let's say, Sean Silcoff at the Globe and Mail, he's sort of the primary tech reporter, along with Josh O'Kane, who's currently on sabbatical and writing a book about Sidewalk Labs, actually. But if you think about any stories that Sean's written about, it's about so many different companies across so many different vertical sectors. So he is much more of a business writer and a generalist in different sectors. In the US, however, you're going to have, even at a business publication like the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, you're going to have media who focus only on the healthcare sector from a technology perspective. You'll have those that focus on the cellular sector from a technology perspective. So again, technology is often broken down into so many different beats. Whereas in Canada, being a smaller medium market, it's very much more so media tend to be more generalists, focusing on tech in general. So what we always say is identify the right journalists for your particular company, for the sector that you're in. And what we always suggest is, to begin with, pick 3 to 5 journalists and make sure that they meet the following criteria. So are they relevant to your industry? What kind of topics are they writing about? Is it relevant to the topics that you're focused on? And is the publication aligned with your business? So I realize that obviously it sounds very limiting, but if you can do really well with 3 to 5 key journalists, you can expand that success into other media contacts. The other thing to keep in mind is that research also shows that basically 20% of your media outreach will yield 80% of your results. So it's your regular 80-20 rule. It really applies to media relations as well. So I would definitely start with a small number. The other thing that's interesting is when we have startups coming to us, they'll say, I'd love to be in TechCrunch. I'd love to be in the Wall Street Journal. I'd love to be in the New York Times. Well, I'd love to be in the Globe and Mail. Well, the reality is that you have to start somewhere. And so we always say you need to look at some of the smaller publications. Start with your tier 2 and tier 3 publications. Sometimes there are smaller local publications that are maybe focused on the city that you're in. They might be focused, there might be smaller sort of blogs that are very niche to your particular sector. If you can start to build a name there in those smaller publications, you can then start building out into those larger ones. Because when a journalist from a larger publication actually comes to take a look at your website and sees that you've got several articles from a niche publication, that's far more credible for them than nothing, because you haven't yet secured the big one that you're going after. So keep that in mind. Then the other part here is engage early. And so one of the golden rules of PR is really to connect with media long before you need them. So we always say invest in relationships early on by giving media something valuable before you actually ask for something in return. And that something in return would be an interview, an introductory briefing, that kind of thing. But a lot of people say, okay, so how do I actually reach out to a journalist or an industry expert without it actually being forced or self-serving? How can I actually give before I get? And so what you want to do is you want to look at some of the natural opportunities to chat about topics that both you and the reporter would care about, something where you can add value. And you can do this in a number of different ways. There might be different groups that you could join, and that may be on LinkedIn. It might be different clubhouse chats. You might also take a look at an article that's been written by a publication on your radar. You may want to share it to other people in your community. So amplify it through Twitter. Share it with some commentary that adds some interesting insight that maybe wasn't actually addressed in that article. It's a great way to do that. People definitely want, media are rewarded often based on the number of shares that they get. And obviously, the more shares that you can help them by amplifying their content, the better off you are when you're actually ready to engage with them. The other thing is you may want to take part in social media discussions. So, for example, if a reporter asks a question or makes a statement on LinkedIn about something, add value to it, add commentary. Don't be self-serving. Don't be promotional in nature, but add something of value. Give the reporter something that maybe they didn't actually know. So that's the other thing that you can really do there. The other thing that you may want to do is you may have mutual friends introduce you, and your mutual friends may be, Shane and the team at the DMZ who have already connected with those media. Ask them, just say, I'm really interested in connecting here. Would you be able to do a warm introduction for me? Again, and you can do that and offer them, offer media the opportunity to have a conversation because you're doing something interesting. And then, of course, the other thing that you can do with that is share interesting work on your networks. Share information that maybe others in your network will help to share and connect you with different media. So that's definitely one way to do that. But I think the bottom line here is that when you do engage, be genuine, don't be self-serving. It's really important to do that. The other thing that you may want to do is reach out. And firstly, I have to preface this particular point with media receive hundreds of media pitches every single day from you're not the only startup going out to them. They receive so many pitches in a day. However, if you can drop a note to them to introduce yourself and your company, let them know what you're doing, what's unique, who your customers are, and let them know that if they happen to be writing on something that relates to the sector that you're in or the work that you're doing, that here are 3 or 5 key topics that you can actually address and do that for them. And this approach is actually very similar to what we used to do. We used to call it an expert letter. And what would happen is media would receive an expert letter around a particular company and the different points that they can talk to. Because when a reporter is actually ready to discuss a particular topic, they will actually go through and they'll do a search of their email to see who's relevant to this particular topic. Who are some of the companies that they've had their eye on? Who are the people that have said that they can actually speak to it? So it's very worthwhile. You may not get a response from them now, but down the road, you may actually hear from them. The other thing I'd like to suggest as part of this early engagement is actually prepare what we call a media fact sheet. Think of it as it used to be called maybe a corporate backgrounder or, just an overview. It's something that provides a snapshot of your startup, outlines your focus, notes early successes, and also includes industry stats that are relevant to your sector that actually can help media tell the story. And so, for example, if anytime that you read an article from a journalist, you'll probably see that they've used different industry research to back up points that they're making. Well, if you can actually research and list in your media fact sheet various industry statistics that are relevant to what you're doing, it actually provides media with a very handy guide and an easy way to pull from that. And they're more likely to actually leverage information that you're sharing with them about your startup. It can also include information like story ideas. What are some of the story ideas or angles that you think are interesting or that your startup may have to tell, and include your bio in that. And what I would also do as part of this engaging early and sort of reaching out to them is make sure that you have a media kit on your website. Make it easily accessible, include things like any contact details for, who can they contact if they want to speak with you about something. Include the media fact sheet, include visuals. Actually, there's a really great media kit that I often refer startups to is 7 Shifts. They have and it's the number 7 and the word shifts, and they're in the restaurant sector. If you go and take a look at their newsroom and their media kit, they actually have a really great one. It provides everything from their logo to logo usage to how their name is used, that kind of thing. Just basic stuff that actually helps media make sure that they reference you in a relevant context. So that's that from that perspective. Then when it comes to finding the right angle, the idea here is to really tailor your story to every journalist. You don't want to, in the PR industry, it's called a spray and pray method of contacting journalists. And the idea there is you have this big list of media and you send everybody the same pitch. That is not going to serve you well at all. You should never, ever be doing that. What you want to take a look at is every journalist takes a different approach to writing a story. The different things that are going to grab the attention of one journalist is going to be different to the next one. It's very subjective. And so what we always recommend is read the articles, like actually read them. Don't just glance through them. Look through them and make notes around what did they include? Did they include industry research? What was the angle that they focused on? How many customers of a company did they interview? What was the most likely angle that they took? And take a look through several articles. What you'll actually see is a trend emerging around a way a particular journalist does things. So I would definitely take the time to do that, understand what journalists are looking for, and that way it will allow you to actually tailor the pitch to each journalist. For example, some journalists also have shared posts around how best to work with them. And if a journalist says, don't send me more than 3 sentences about what you're doing, well, follow their guidance. The other thing is that I always suggest when it comes to finding the right angle is actually think like a journalist. When you start to put yourself in a journalist's shoes, it'll dramatically increase your chances of success. So to give you an example, a client of ours actually shared a white paper with us about the travel sector and sort of how things how things happened over the last 18 months. And they want to actually go out and pitch it to media. I read the white paper and did a call with them. And I said, it's a very backward looking type white paper where it's not really providing anything forward looking that's newsworthy. I said, media are generally not going to be interested in that. So you can, think about what a journalist is looking for. They're not going to write tomorrow about news that happened 3 days ago. They want something that's current. So always think about that. The other thing to think about is that, when a dog bites a man, that's not news. But if a man bit a dog, that's news. So just kind of turn things around in the way that you think of things. The other thing is to ask yourself, why would media care? So oftentimes is when a client has news that they're putting out there, I'll use the basic example of I'm launching a new website. Why would media care? They're never going to write about that. However, if you're a McDonald's, if you're a Nike, and you're launching a completely new brand look and feel, absolutely media are going to be interested in that. But launching your website, they're not going to care. So think about why would they actually care about that? And then use every bit of research available to you to create your hook. The other thing is, and this is a really important tip, is find a way to relate your story to the topics that the target journalists are invested in. So again, by doing that research and understanding what topics they cover most often and what their most popular articles are focused on, will allow you to actually develop and tailor that pitch. The other thing to keep in mind is that cold calls to journalists are a no-no. So to give you an example, we've been dealing with a couple of different journalists at the Globe and Mail this week for a client for an exclusive story. And one of them is somebody that we've never reached out to before, but based on a past article, I knew that he was the right fit. I reached out to him, sent a pitch, detailed everything in there, crickets, didn't hear anything back. So the next day, I went out to him, I said, wanted to check if you had a chance to take a look through this. The reason why I'm following up is we're offering this to you on an exclusive basis, and would be great to know if you're interested or not so that we can move on. Please let me know if you're open to a call. I would never have called that journalist just blindly unless I have a relationship with him. It's always good to actually sort of ask, are you open to a conversation? Are you willing to do that? And ultimately he replied like literally within minutes to say, apologies for not responding. And yes, can we please set up a call? And that conversation actually led us to him referring us to another reporter that's even more aligned with the story. So definitely keep in mind, no cold calls, no cookie cutter emails, to all journalists. It can land you on a reporter's blacklist, and that's the last place that you want to be. And just personalize your outreach up front and make sure that your pitch is tight, no more than 2 to 3 paragraphs in length, and make sure it identifies the key points that you want to focus on. So as in terms of crafting your pitch, just other points around that is definitely be concise. Don't give a whole diatribe in the first paragraph. Be upfront and say, this is what we're doing. This is why I think you might be interested. Answer the question, why should I care? And then provide a little bit more context. And then ask them to let you know if it's of interest to them. And again, they may not respond. Typically, if they don't respond, I would follow up at least once. I wouldn't do it more than that. Sometimes media are great and they come back to you and they'll say, I'm really not interested. Or sometimes they'll come back and they'll say, this is interesting, not now. Contact me in 3 weeks, contact me in a month or whatever. Just keep that in mind. And if they say contact them in 3 weeks, in 3 weeks' time, put it in your calendar and follow up with them then. So that's the idea there in terms of crafting your pitch. Give them enough just to intrigue them. You don't want to literally blurt out your entire story. You want to have enough so that when you do a call with them, that you can actually go into more depth and provide them more information than what was offered in the pitch. All right, then when it comes to prioritizing media, this is a big one and it's an important one. A lot of times we will get a request from media for a client looking for an interview. We will always respond to a reporter as soon as that comes in to say, thank you for your note, let me check and I will get back to you. That acknowledgement at least lets the reporter know that you've gotten the message and that you're looking at it. The reason why this is important is sometimes reporters are on deadline. And if they don't know that you've got the pitch and that you're looking into it, they might start straight away looking at another source for their story. So definitely respond straight away. Let them know that you're looking into it. Ask them if they haven't already stated it in their response or in their note to you. What's your deadline? What's your availability for an interview? Just make sure that you're responding, pretty quickly. And I would say at the very least within an hour, at least acknowledge their request. Then if a reporter gives you a deadline of, by end of day today, make sure you respond well in time. Don't just not respond because again, that's going to get you on a reporter's blacklist. And I always say when it comes to prioritizing media, I always tell my customers to prioritize media in the same way my own clients. So for example, if you would step out of a meeting to take a call from a client of yours, you should step out of a meeting to take a call from a reporter. It's equally as important to your business. And the more that you show them that you're willing to go the extra mile to be available for them, the more likely they are to be available for you when you next reach out to them. The other thing is make sure that you are, when you're actually prioritizing media, the other thing that you want to do is go out to them as a follow-up with additional information. I don't like to go back to a reporter and say, just following up to make sure you got my message. That's the very last thing you want to do. You want to go back and offer up something further. So for example, if you sent a particular pitch, you might, maybe you came across a research study. You may say, I actually just, as a follow-up to my note below, I actually came across this great research study that really reinforces this. I've included a link here for you in case that's of interest. Again, provide them with everything that they need and make sure that you understand, they know that you understand that their time is a precious resource. So just engage with them and be available to them when they come back to you. The other thing is when a reporter has actually covered you and written information about you, the very first thing that you should be planning to do is reshare their content. You want to take whatever they've written about you, amplify it on your social channels, tag them. Don't just share it and not tag them. Tag the publication, tag the actual writer. Make sure that you are actually starting to build that relationship with them. The other point I would say is that when you reach out to a reporter and they respond to you, that's a good opportunity to actually connect with them on LinkedIn. You should already be following them on Twitter long before you reach out to them, but start to build that relationship so that you are at least connected. In that way, especially on LinkedIn, they will see what you're sharing when they go on there as part of their feed. But the whole idea here is you want to support them as much as they support you. So these are sort of really the key areas that I've focused on as part of this presentation. I wanted to keep at least some time, and I know that we only had an hour, so I've kept sort of the last 15 minutes open for questions. But this gives you a very high level look at how to actually work with media, how to actually build a relationship with them. Obviously, it's much more complex. You learn mostly by doing, you learn mostly by reading and making yourself very comfortable. There are different resources out there that you can research. Like I said, the Spin Sucks blog is great for that. And take a look at the Forbes Council. There's Forbes Communication Councils. They also provide a lot of great insights. A lot of different folks there participate and share content around how to do PR. So I would highly encourage you to take a look at that and digest it. And then, of course, once your startup is at the point where you can either bring somebody in-house to handle PR for you, we realize that for you guys as a founder or CEO, you don't necessarily have the bandwidth to do this. So when you're ready, you'll bring somebody in, or you'd bring on a PR consultant or an agency or whatever. But again, there's a lot that you can do before you're even at that point. And so there we go. Questions?
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you very much. And I think one of the things we'll do is we'll stop the recording so that we can kind of have a nice tight video for people to review afterwards and jump into questions. So excuse the sound.